The hume of fluorescent lights filled the open-plan office of Sterling Wealth Management, a sleek financial firm perched on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. It was 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday in October 2024, and the city skyline sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a mosaic of ambition and secrets. Most of the analysts had long since fled for happy hours or late-night Ubers, but Ethan Caldwell, 28, sat hunched over his desk, his eyes locked on a spreadsheet glowing on his dual monitors. Numbers danced across the screen, columns of transactions, dates, and dollar amounts that most people would find mind-numbing. To Ethan, they were a language, one he spoke fluently. He wasn't supposed to be here this late. His girlfriend Mia had texted him twice already, reminding him about dinner at her place. "You're gonna miss the lasagna," she'd written, followed by a winking emoji. But Ethan couldn't tear himself away. Something was wrong with the accounts he'd been reviewing, and it wasn't just a typo or a misplaced decimal. The numbers were whispering to him, and what they were saying wasn't good. Ethan had been a junior financial analyst at Sterling for just under 2 years, hired straight out of his master's program at Northwestern. He wasn't flashy, no corner office aspirations, no knack for schmoozing at client dinners. What he had was a gift for patterns. Give him a ledger, and he'd find the thread others missed, the invoice that didn't add up, the payment routed through one too many banks. His colleagues called it obsessive. Ethan called it clarity. Numbers don't lie, he'd always believed. People do. Tonight, the numbers were screaming. It had started 3 weeks ago with the Vanguard Alliance accounts, a high-value client portfolio Sterling handled with kid gloves. Ethan's job was routine. Cross-check invoices, verify payment schedules, flag anything that looked off. At first, the discrepancies were subtle. A $12,000 0-cent invoice listed as $12.50. A vendor name spelled differently on 2 separate forms. Clerical errors, he'd thought. But then he dug deeper. Payments from Vanguard were cycling through the same 4 routing numbers, bouncing between banks in Delaware, the Caymans, and a small outfit in Luxembourg. The vendors tied to these payments, BrightPath Solutions, Horizon Ventures, Apex Consulting, had no websites, no LinkedIn profiles, no physical addresses Ethan could verify. They were ghosts, and yet millions of dollars were flowing through them. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, running a hand through his dark hair. His cubicle was a fortress of order, pens aligned parallel to his keyboard, a single framed photo of him and Mia at Lake Michigan last summer, a post-it note with his grandmother's handwriting stuck to his monitor. "Trust what you see, Ethan," it read. She'd died 2 years ago, leaving him enough to clear his student loans and a lifetime of advice he couldn't. Right now, what he saw was trouble. The office was quiet except for the distant whir of a vacuum cleaner down the hall. Ethan opened a new tab on his browser and typed BrightPath Solutions, Chicago. Nothing. He tried Horizon Ventures with the same result. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery. He'd always loved puzzles as a kid, crosswords, Rubik's Cubes, anything that demanded focus. This was bigger than a puzzle. This was a secret someone didn't want found. He pulled up the transaction history again, filtering for payments over $50,000, 0 cents. Over the past 6 months, Vanguard had moved $3,200,000, 0 cents, through these phantom vendors, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic compliance review. It was clever, too clever to be accidental. Ethan highlighted the transactions, copied them into a separate file, and labeled it Vanguard_anomalies. He hesitated, then encrypted the file with a password only he knew. Something told him he'd need it. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Sterling before the coffee machine was even warm. He wore his usual uniform, navy blazer, white shirt, no tie. His colleagues teased him about looking like he'd stepped out of a J. Crew catalog, but Ethan didn't care. He wasn't here to impress anyone with his wardrobe. He was here to do his job, and today that meant talking to his boss. Nathan Brooks ran Sterling's client accounts division from a corner office with a view of the Chicago River. At 45, he was the kind of man who could charm a room with a smile and intimidate it with a glance. His office was a shrine to success, mahogany desk, framed MBA from Wharton, a set of golf clubs worth more than Ethan's car leaning against the wall. Nathan had hired Ethan personally, saying during the interview, I need someone who sees what others miss. Ethan had taken that to heart. Now he wondered if Nathan would regret those words. He knocked on the open door at 9:15 IM, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Nathan was on the phone, laughing about a Bears game, but waved Ethan in. "Hang on, Jim," he said into the receiver, then muted the call. "What's up, Caldwell?" Ethan set the folder on the desk. "I found something in the Vanguard Alliance accounts. It's concerning." Nathan's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to Ethan. "Concerning how?" Ethan opened the folder, pointing to the highlighted pages. "These transactions don't add up. Invoices are inflated, sometimes by a few thousand, sometimes more. The payments go through shell companies. Same routing patterns, same vendors, but I can't verify any of them. It looks systematic." Nathan leaned forward, flipping through the pages. His face was unreadable at first, but as he scanned the numbers, his jaw tightened. He closed the folder with a deliberate snap, his hand resting on it like he was pinning down a threat. "Vanguard's one of our biggest clients," he said, his voice low. "They bring in millions a year. You sure you're not misreading this?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm sure. I triple-checked." Nathan studied him for a moment, his fingers drumming on the folder. Then he leaned back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, Ethan, I appreciate the diligence, but let's not jump to conclusions. These are valuable relationships. Mistakes happen. Let it go." The words landed like a punch Ethan hadn't seen coming. He'd expected questions, maybe a request for more data, not a dismissal. "You're saying don't investigate." "I'm saying don't make waves." Nathan's tone was final. He slid the folder back across the desk. "I'll handle it." Ethan nodded, though every instinct screamed to argue. Understood. He took the folder and left, feeling Nathan's eyes on his back as he walked out. By noon, Ethan was back at his desk, staring at his monitors but not seeing the numbers. Nathan's reaction didn't sit right. The man hadn't asked a single follow-up question, no clarification, no curiosity, just let it go. Ethan had worked under Nathan long enough to know he wasn't sloppy. If anything, Nathan was meticulous, the kind of boss who noticed if a report was 5 minutes late. So why the brush-off? He opened the encrypted file again, scrolling through the transactions. The pattern was unmistakable now, a web of payments designed to look legitimate but unraveling under scrutiny. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't naive, he knew big firms sometimes bent rules for big clients, but this felt different. This felt like a cover-up. He thought about his grandmother's note on his monitor, "Trust what you see." She'd raised him after his parents died in a house fire when he was 10, teaching him to question, to dig, to never take things at face value. "People hide things, Ethan," she'd say over her morning coffee. "Doesn't mean they're smarter than you." He wished she were here now, her sharp eyes cutting through the fog of his doubt. Ethan's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. A text from Mia. "You okay? You seemed off last night." He typed a quick reply. "Just work stuff, talk later," and set the phone down. He couldn't tell her about this. Not yet. Mia was a graphic designer, her world full of color and creativity, not spreadsheets and suspicion. She wouldn't understand why he couldn't let this go. He made a decision then, one he knew could change everything. He copied the Vanguard_anomalies file onto a USB drive, slipped it into his pocket, and deleted the original from his work computer. If Nathan wasn't going to listen, Ethan would find someone who would. The next morning, Ethan woke to an email from HR, timestamp 6:47 a.m. The subject line was blunt. Urgent. Meeting today. His stomach sank as he read the message. Sterling Wealth Management was undergoing a strategic restructuring, and his position as a junior analyst was being eliminated, effective immediately. A severance package would be provided, and he was to clear his desk by 11 o'clock IA email. The email was signed by Lisa Carter, the HR director he'd met exactly once at his onboarding. He sat on the edge of his bed, the Chicago sunrise painting his apartment in shades of gold. Restructuring? Sterling had posted record profits last quarter, and Ethan's performance reviews were stellar. He'd been in line for a promotion, not a pink slip. The timing wasn't a coincidence. This was about Vanguard. This was about Nathan. Ethan dressed in silence, choosing his best suit as if it were armor. He didn't call Mia or his friends. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted answers. At the office, he packed his belongings methodically. The photo of him and Mia, his grandmother's note, a half-empty box of pens. His colleagues avoided his gaze, their whispers fading as he passed. He was invisible now, a ghost in a place he'd spent 60 hours a week for 2 years. Before leaving, he stopped at the compliance department on the 19th floor. Sarah Mitchell was a senior analyst there, a woman in her late 30s with a reputation for being relentless. Ethan had met her a few times in the break room, where she'd once complimented his work on a minor discrepancy he'd flagged. "Not everyone bothers to look that close," she'd said, handing him her card. "Call me if you ever see something big." He knocked on her office door, his heart pounding. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her glasses perched on her nose. "Ethan, what's this about?" He closed the door behind him. "I'm out as of today. Restructuring, they say. But I found something you need to see." He pulled the USB drive from his pocket and set it on her desk. Vanguard Alliance, shell companies, inflated invoices, payments that don't add up. I showed Nathan Brooks yesterday, and now I'm gone. Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. "You kept records?" "Enough to start asking questions. I don't know how deep this goes, but it's not a mistake." She picked up the drive, turning it over in her hand. "This could be a problem, Ethan. For you, for me, for a lot of people." "I know, but I can't walk away from it." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me a day to look at this. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't talk to anyone else until then." Ethan left her office feeling lighter, though the weight of what he'd done lingered. He'd crossed a line. There was no going back. As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, his phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Nathan, sent just minutes ago. "Sorry to hear about the restructuring, Ethan. You're talented. Let me know if you need a reference." Ethan stared at the words, his thumb hovering over the reply button. A reference? From the man who'd shut him down, who'd likely orchestrated his firing? He deleted the email without responding. Nathan didn't get to play the good guy now. Outside, the Chicago wind hit him like a warning. Ethan zipped up his jacket and headed toward the L train, the USB drive's absence in his pocket a reminder of the choice he'd made. He didn't know what Sarah would find or what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The numbers didn't lie, and neither would he. The Chicago wind howled through the canyons of skyscrapers as Ethan Caldwell stepped off the L train at Clark/Lake, his breath fogging in the early November chill. It was 6:12 p.m., 3 days since he'd been escorted out of Sterling Wealth Management with a cardboard box and a severance check that felt more like hush money than goodwill. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket, but he ignored it. Probably Mia again, asking why he'd been dodging her calls. He couldn't face her yet. Not until he knew what he'd set in motion by handing that USB drive to Sarah. Mitchell. Ethan's apartment was a modest one-bedroom in Logan Square, a third-floor walk-up crammed with second-hand furniture and stacks of finance textbooks he hadn't touched since grad school. He locked the door behind him, double-checking the deadbolt out of a paranoia he hadn't felt a week ago. The place smelled faintly of coffee and the Thai takeout he'd forgotten to toss. He dropped his keys on the counter, flicked on the light, and froze. A certified letter sat on his kitchen table, the kind delivered by someone who needed a signature. He hadn't been home all day. How the hell did it get inside? The envelope bore the logo of Sterling Wealth Management, its silver embossing glinting like a warning. Ethan's pulse kicked up a notch. He tore it open, scanning the single page inside. The words hit like a sucker punch. Theft of proprietary information, breach of confidentiality, defamation. Sterling was accusing him of stealing internal records and spreading false and damaging claims about their operations. They demanded he return all company documents, physical and digital, within 48 hours and sign a sworn statement retracting any accusations. Failure to comply, the letter warned, would result in all available legal remedies. It was signed by Sterling's general counsel, a name Ethan didn't recognize, but the message was clear. Shut up, or we'll bury you." He sank into a chair, the paper trembling in his hands. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. He'd expected pushback, maybe a stern phone call, but not this. Not a legal sledgehammer aimed at his future. He grabbed his laptop, opened the encrypted folder he'd backed up before leaving Sterling, and stared at the Vanguard Alliance files. The numbers were still there, unyielding, $3,200,000, 0 cents, funneled through ghost vendors, a pattern so blatant it screamed fraud. Had Nathan Brooks known this was coming? Had he orchestrated it? His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Ethan, it's Nathan." The voice was smooth, familiar, but laced with something new. Urgency. "We need to talk." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "About what? The letter you guys slipped into my apartment. Real classy, by the way." A pause. "I don't know anything about that." "Look, I heard about the restructuring. Tough break. But this thing you're doing, it's a mistake. Let's meet, grab a coffee. 15 minutes. Ethan almost laughed. Coffee? Like they were old pals sorting out a misunderstanding? "What thing am I doing, Nathan? Asking questions you didn't want to hear?" Another pause, longer this time. "You're smart, Ethan. Smarter than most. But you're poking around in places you don't understand. These people, they don't play games." "Who's they?" Ethan pressed, his voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking through him. "Vanguard? You? Who am I supposed to be scared of?" Nathan's tone hardened. "Just meet me, tomorrow, 10 a.m., that diner on Wabash. I'm trying to help you here." "Help me?" Ethan snapped. "You fired me the day after I showed you those files. You don't get to play savior now." "Ethan." He hung up, his heart pounding so loud he could hear it. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in. Nathan's words echoed, "These people don't play games." What did that mean? Was Sterling just protecting a client? Or was something bigger at stake? Something worth breaking into his home to deliver a threat? He pulled out his wallet and found Sarah Mitchell's card, her direct line printed in crisp black ink. He dialed before he could second-guess himself. It rang twice before she picked up. "Ethan?" Her voice was cautious, like she'd been expecting trouble. "What's wrong?" "They're coming for me," he said, glancing at the letter on the table. "Sterling sent a legal threat to my apartment, inside my apartment. Nathan just called trying to get me to back off. I need to know if you've looked at the files." Sarah didn't answer right away. He heard the faint clink of a glass, the rustle of papers. "I looked," she said finally. "And you're right, it's bad, worse than you think." Ethan leaned forward, his free hand gripping the edge of the table. "How bad?" "Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m., my office." "And Ethan?" "Don't talk to Nathan. Don't talk to anyone." She hung up before he could respond. Ethan stared at the phone, the silence in the room heavier than before. He didn't sleep that night, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Who had been in his apartment? What did Sarah know? And why did Nathan sound scared? Sarah Mitchell's office was a stark contrast to Nathan's mahogany empire. Tucked in a corner of Sterling's compliance department, it was all function, no flair. Metal filing cabinets, a desk buried under regulatory manuals, a single dying plant in a cracked pot. When Ethan arrived at 7:55 a.m., Sarah was already there, her glasses low on her nose, a laptop open to a spreadsheet that looked eerily familiar. "Close the door," she said without looking up. Ethan did, his coat still damp from the morning drizzle. "You said it's worse than I thought. What did you find?" Sarah pushed her glasses up and met his eyes. "Sit down, Ethan. This isn't a conversation you want to have standing." He sat, his stomach twisting. Sarah turned her laptop toward him, revealing a web of transactions that dwarfed what he'd uncovered. "Vanguard Alliance isn't the only problem," she said, pointing to the screen. "There are 3 other client groups running similar schemes. Orion Capital, Pinnacle Holdings, Triton Partners. All high value, all untouchable. Over the past 4 years, they've moved at least $12 million 0 cents through shell companies, maybe more." Ethan's mouth went dry. 12 million? How did no one notice? They noticed, Sarah said, her voice sharp, or they were told not to. These accounts are locked down. Only a handful of people can access them. Nathan's one of them, so is Victor Sterling. Ethan froze. Victor Sterling was the firm's founder and CEO, a Chicago legend whose name adorned charity galas and business school scholarships. You're saying the CEO's involved? I'm saying it goes to the top. Sarah opened a folder on her desk, pulling out a printout. I found something else. 2 years ago, an analyst named Ryan Carter started asking questions about Orion Capital. He flagged the same kind of discrepancies you did: routing patterns, fake vendors. He took it to compliance, then to the SEC. 3 days later, he was dead. Ethan's breath caught. Dead how? Hit and run. Driver was never found. Police called it a tragic accident, but Ryan's notes mentioned Orion specifically, and get this, his hard drive was wiped clean the night he died. No backups, no trace of his work. Ethan leaned back, his mind reeling. You think Sterling had him killed? I don't know what to think, Sarah said, but her eyes said otherwise. What I know is that Ryan saw something he wasn't supposed to, just like you. And now you're out of a job, with a legal threat hanging over your head. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. So what do we do? If this goes as high as you say, who can we even trust? Sarah pulled a business card from her drawer and slid it across the desk. It was plain white, with only a name and a number: Agent Lauren Carter, FBI. I've worked with her before, Sarah said. Financial Crimes Unit. She's clean, and she's not afraid of people like Victor Sterling. But if we go to her, Ethan, there's no turning back. You'll be a whistleblower, your career, your life. It'll never be the same. Ethan stared at the card, his grandmother's voice echoing in his head. Trust what you see. He'd trusted the numbers, and they'd led him here, to a choice between safety and truth. Set the meeting, he said. I'm in. The FBI field office was a fortress of gray concrete in the West Loop, unmarked except for a discreet plaque by the entrance. Ethan and Sarah arrived at 3:00 p.m. the next day, their coats dusted with the first snowflakes of the season. Agent Lauren Carter met them in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. She was in her early 40s, with sharp green eyes and a handshake that meant business. No suit, just a sweater and jeans. But her presence filled the room. Start from the beginning, she said, a notepad in front of her. Everything you've got. For the next hour, Ethan laid out what he'd found. The Vanguard files, the shell companies, Nathan's dismissal, the letter in his apartment. Sarah filled in the gaps, presenting her own evidence. Printouts, digital logs, even a recording of a vague voicemail from Nathan saying, "Keep Orion quiet, or we're all screwed." When they finished, Lauren leaned back, tapping her pen against the table. If you're right, she said, this isn't just fraud, it's money laundering, potentially tied to bigger fish. Cartels, tax evasion, you name it. We've had Sterling on our radar for a while, but nothing solid until now. Ethan's heart raced. You believe us? I believe your evidence, Lauren corrected. But we'll need more to move. Bank records, internal memos, anything that nails Victor Sterling and his inner circle. And Ethan? You'll need to testify. That means going public eventually. Defense attorneys will rip you apart, call you a liar, a disgruntled employee. You ready for that? Ethan thought of Ryan Carter, dead at 29 for asking the wrong questions. He thought of Nathan's voice on the phone, warning him about these people. He thought of Mia, who still didn't know why he'd been pulling away. I'm ready, he said. Lauren nodded. Good. For now, tell no one about this. Not your girlfriend, not your mom, nobody. And watch your back. If Sterling's willing to break into your apartment, they're not done with you. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and secrecy. Ethan moved out of his apartment, crashing at a cheap motel near O'Hare under a fake name. He told Mia he was dealing with a family emergency, a lie that left a bitter taste in his mouth. Sarah fed him updates through burner phones, each call laced with new fragments of evidence. Offshore accounts linked to Victor Sterling, emails hinting at payoffs to regulators, a second analyst who'd vanished after digging into Triton Partners. Then, on a frigid December morning, it happened. Ethan was eating a stale bagel in his motel room when his burner phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Today, 9 a.m. Stay tuned. He turned on the TV, flipping to CNBC. At 9:02, the headline broke: FBI raids Sterling Wealth Management in major fraud probe. Footage showed agents storming the glass tower, employees spilling onto the sidewalk, Nathan Brooks being led to a black SUV, his face pale but defiant. Ethan watched, his coffee going cold. Lauren called an hour later. "We got them," she said. "Victor Sterling, the CFO, 2 senior partners, all in custody. Vanguard's parent company Apex Global is locked down too. Their CEO, Marcus Kane, skipped town last week, but we've frozen their assets." Ethan exhaled, relief mixing with disbelief. What about Nathan? Flipped already. Singing like a canary to save his skin. "You and Sarah gave us enough to crack this wide open." Ethan leaned against the motel wall, the weight of the past month lifting slightly. "So what happens now?" "Now you come in," Lauren said. "We need your statement, your testimony. You're the linchpin, Ethan. But I'm not going to lie, this is just the start. Apex has friends in high places. They'll fight dirty." He thought of the letter, the break-in, Ryan Carter's empty desk. "I know," he said. "I'm not backing down." 3 months later, Ethan stood in a federal prosecutor's office, going over his testimony for the 5th time. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's recordings, Ethan's original files, bank records seized in the raid, and now confessions from 4 Sterling employees who'd been too scared to speak before. Victor Sterling faced 15 years for money laundering and fraud. Nathan got a plea deal, 5 years, maybe less, with good behavior. Marcus Kane was still missing, rumored to be hiding in Dubai. The SEC called Ethan one gray afternoon, offering a whistleblower reward that made his head spin. 15% of Sterling's penalties, enough to buy a house, maybe 2. He accepted a job at a smaller firm in Evanston where the CEO shook his hand and said, "We need people like you." The industry was changing, new regulations, stricter audits, all ripples from the Sterling scandal. Ethan's name was in the papers now, not always kindly. Some called him a hero, others, a traitor. He didn't care. One evening, as spring crept into Chicago, Ethan sat at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, reviewing reports for his new job. A young analyst approached, nervous, clutching a notebook. "You're Ethan Caldwell, right? They say you're the guy to talk to about compliance?" Ethan smiled, gesturing to the empty chair. "Have a seat. Let me tell you about patterns. And why you never look away."